Welcome everyone to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is the Analects. We'll be covering book 9. We'll start with chapter 12. As usual, Penny, would you mind reading the passage to get us started?
Chapter 12. Does this start out the master being very ill?
Let me double check on my...
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause my numbers are slightly different. The master being very ill, Zilu wished the disciples to act as ministers to him. During a remission of his illness, he said, "Long has the conduct of you been deceitful. By pretending to have ministers when I have them not, whom shall I impose upon? Shall I impose upon heaven? Moreover, then that I should die in the hands of ministers, is it not better that I should die in the hands of you, my disciples? And though I may not get a great burial, shall I die upon the road?"
Thank you, Penny. Would anybody else like to read their version?
If there's no other takers, I can read the DC Lao.
Yes, please, go right ahead.
Maybe. Analects, book 9, chapter 12. The master was seriously ill. Zulu told his disciples to act as retainers. During a period when his condition had improved, the master said, "You has long been practicing deception. In pretending that I had retainers when I had none, who would we be deceiving? Would we be deceiving heaven? Moreover, would I...
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. Moreover, would I not rather die in your hands, my friends, than in the hands of retainers? And even if I were not given an elaborate funeral, it is not as if I was dying by the wayside."
Okay, I'm going to read chapter 12. Okay, that's the second time Confucius was seriously very sick. Okay, so almost died. Do you remember? It's on book 7, chapter 35. That's another time. Confucius is very ill, almost died. So Zilu has to call some prayer, right? And then Confucius said, "I have been praying for like this for a while." He implied it's useless. So that's another time. I don't see that's the same time, but it could be the same time. But that's again, at least in the Confucius Analects, that's the second time Confucius was very ill. In book 10, it's also talk about Confucius was ill, but doesn't sound he was very ill in book 10. But book 7 and book 9 talk about Confucius was very ill. The word 疾, okay, 疾病 means severe. Okay, so that means he's very ill. So the master was very sick. Zilu, both times Zilu was there. Okay, Zilu had the disciples act as house minister for Confucius' funeral. So Confucius during this time has not employed by the government, by the state. So I don't know what's the reason, but Zilu must think Confucius deserves a grand burial. So Confucius has no government title status at that time. So Zilu has disciples. Okay, because Zilu probably not at least is very one of the oldest disciples of Confucius. So he kind of has the younger one to act as the house ministers to prepare a grand funeral for Confucius. During his remission, Confucius said, long has you been deceitful. Okay, so a little bit think when the writer, the author of Analect, right, 子路, he called him 子路, that's his courtesy name. And then when Confucius, who is senior to 子路, so Confucius will call him even name, which is you, right? So Confucius said, long has you been deceitful, okay? Have no house ministers, but pretended to have them. Whom do I deceive? Okay. Do I deceive heaven? I would rather die in the hands of my boys than in hands of house minister. Even though I may receive no great funeral, it is not like I would be dying by the side of the road. So this word "you" is a little bit difficult to translate. Basically, Confucius is talking about without house minister, without the grand funeral, he would rather die in, he said, 2-3 kids. So that means the young boys, okay? And then anyway, he would not die on the road or street. So he think that'll be fine. So that's the Confucius concept of a funeral. So my understanding is he want to follow, be buried according to the ritual, to the Li. That's Confucius teaching in this one. Yeah, thank you. So among you have.
Yes, and Joe, you're muted.
Yeah, I just realized that. So yes, thank you, Jason, for that explanation. Go ahead, Amon.
No further explanation. I think Jason's translation is excellent. I think the translations generally get to the idea of what is being communicated in this passage, but I want to draw particular attention to it because it's a distinction that we'll see later on. There are other passages, and I can't remember off the top of my head which one, where the concern for proper performance seems to supersede, that he must ride in a chariot because he has a station that requires it, or he must do certain things because the station requires it. Here we have an example of one of his students, one of his oldest students, trying to follow in those steps of, here's what is expected. We don't have the means to actually do it, so let's make a performance of it. And Confucius then chiding him for being deceitful or deceptive. So it seems that Confucius' concern with keeping up appearances, as I would put it, extends to the point of deceit, or extends to the point of where you are falsifying. And that was his major concern with many of the actors of his time, especially when he talks about the Zhu family, who aren't supposed to be performing the rituals that they perform, or taking on airs they have no right to. Here we have an example of him saying to his boys, I have no right to take on these airs because I don't have the actual means to have retainers, ministers about my house. It's all right if the world doesn't see me keeping up with the Joneses, as it were. It's better that I honestly die with my boys and seem to be letting down the gentry than it is to deceive for the sake of just having good appearances. It's a very subtle distinction to draw out from this passage, but when you compare it with other passages, it starts to be a little clearer.
Thank you for that, Amon. Does anybody else have any comments? If not, I mean, I can offer just a couple. It almost seems as if it's religious in nature, almost to a certain degree, that you're violating, this code of this ritual where you're having a funeral that is not necessarily appropriate or in line with your position. And again, we have seen this throughout, where, he actually, where Confucius actually is critical of individuals that do not celebrate funeral rites properly. So for this particular instance, it seems as if, even in his particular instance where he was about to die, it seems like he still holds, holds true to his beliefs. That's what I'm taken about it. But it's almost, I feel like it's almost religious to a certain degree. Does anybody else have any comments or? Go ahead. I see some-
If the ritual is not followed and he's willing to quote, die on the side of the road, does that mean that he doesn't achieve his place in, say, heaven? Or is there a kind of, I wouldn't say the word purgatory, but is there a place where he would go other than heaven if he died on the side of the road? Is he telling his disciples, follow the ritual, but if you don't, you can still attain heaven?
I'm going to tackle this just a little bit. It doesn't have quite that connotation. It is said that ancestor worship is the truest and deepest religion of ancient China, and that is absolutely the case. It would be unseemly for him to not be treated with respect. Not performing the correct rituals. We talked about this tension between rationalists and superstition last week, so I don't want to belabor it. But on one end of the spectrum, you could say that there would be a belief that he would be a hungry ghost wandering if he wasn't offered the correct rituals and rites. On the other end of the spectrum would just be the sort of social distaste of disrespect for a figure as towering as him to be offered no greater sort of funerary service than, say, a common coolie. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers it for you.
I just want to make sure he wasn't in this kind of static place where he's neither, his death means something to one person and not to another, and that he's kind of well, you use the word ghost, but that's basically in a situation like that. He's neither here nor there. Now that may not be what they're talking about, but I just thought that was something just to bring up.
Thank you, Sebastian. Quan.
Here, I think that we touch to something quite complex in ancient China, in the sense that we don't truly have we don't have a certainty what the common people believe about their fate after death. Okay, but what is clear is about the royalty and the nobility. If we take the Shang dynasty, which is the dynasty just before the Zhou dynasty, between 1600 BCE to 1045 BCE, it's very clear that there's a supreme god called Shangdi that we can translate by the Supreme Lord. And the former kings who die will go to Shangdi, okay? And they won't be part of the heavenly court of Shangdi, and their living offspring can communicate with them through sacrifices and divination. Okay, that it was the humble beginning of the I Ching before it became a more complex psycho-philosophical mode. So the Zhou dynasty, being a vassal of the Shang Ying dynasty before they created their own dynasty, inherited that cosmological and religious perspective. Okay, so we can surmise that for the royalty of the Zhou dynasty and the nobility of the Zhou dynasty, they would believe that at the death they would go to be in the heavenly court, not of Shangdi this time, because with the Zhou dynasty, Shangdi changed his name to Tian, heaven, but it was a kind of supreme god anyway. And here I think that in the past it was a person, okay, a heavenly person, even if later philosopher of imperial times would make it more and more abstract, okay, but still it's a heavenly supreme entity. And the rituals and the ritual that you are allowed to perform depend on your social rank. Okay, you cannot sacrifice to the mountain if you're not a feudal lord. You cannot sacrifice to heaven or to Shangdi if you're not part of the royal family. If the king asked to one of his younger brother or younger cousin to perform the sacrifice to heaven to replace him, it was a very high honor. And even it's still the case with the last imperial dynasty, the Qing dynasty, from 1644 to 1911. The last time that sacrifice to heaven has been performed, it was in 1911. Okay, it was in the 20th century. And even at that time, it was a high honor if a younger brother or the younger cousin was asked by the emperor to perform the sacrifice, at his place because he cannot do it. Okay, but most of the time it was lesser sacrifices, because the big sacrifice to heaven, it was always the emperor. So there was certainly a religious component from the time of the Shangyi dynasty to 1911 AD. Okay, because let's not forget, and that's one of my obsessions, I always want to take the occasion to say that yes, Confucianism is a complex philosophical system and is a complex ritualistic system to uphold a certain social system, but it is also the official religion.
I'm sorry, you cut out at one of the most
of
important parts.
Imperial China, Western. Okay, so I said that I always take the occasion to say that yes, Confucianism is a philosophical system and a social hierarchical system, but it's also the official religion of Imperial China from the moment the empty to the end of the imperial era in 1911 AD. So it's about 21st century.
Thank you for that. That helps clarify the both the practical value as well as the spiritual value that these rituals actually bring. So Jason, followed by Mark.
Yeah, well, just continue from what Kwon talked about and what Joe talked about religious. I read this one is probably slightly different than a lot of people. I read this text as two things have conflicts, right? Religious and ritual. There's two things in conflicts. And then I always think Confucian school are focused. They always focus more on ritual than religious. So in this case, Confucius' message is ritual is more important. And then you have to do it the ritual in the proper way, because Zilu also put the ritual or important, because Zilu want to have the younger disciples to do the pretend as a house minister. His purpose may not be religious. His purpose is ritual. He want to make sure Confucius deserve this kind of ritualistic burial. But Confucius idea of ritual is kind of like more follow the status, not elaborate. So Confucius say, why you are cheating, right? Who you cheat for? I already died. I'm dying. Who you want to cheat? You want to cheat, deceive the heaven. That's Confucius' answer. So there's no reason to cheat because that's the state. And that's my understanding on this text. Okay. Because I always think Confucius is less religious than most of the people during that time. Okay. And okay. And then that's the first subject. Second subject is kind of a question to everyone. It's continue from Sebastian's talking about the Confucius died on the road. So my reading on the final sentence is Confucius said, even I die, even I don't have a grand burial. The young kids, 2-3 young kids will bury me. All right, so that's the second choice. And the Confucius said, that's great. And the last sentence is saying he will not die on the street because there's no choice, no situation he will die on the street. So that's his message. So I just try to explain correctly is I will die, at least these kids will bury me. They will not let me die on the street. That's Confucius' message. That's what I read in this text. But seems like some translation, not necessarily English, even Chinese, you probably have a different interpretation. But at least my understanding is, at least the young kids, the young disciple will bury me. I will never die on the street. That's his message. Don't worry about the grand burial because I have a disciple, they will bury me. I will not die on the street. That's what his message. At least that's my understanding of Confucius' message.
Thank you, Jason. Mark, followed by Penny, then Quan.
Thanks, Joseph. I'm really enjoying the discussion of the relationship between ritual and religion. And I thank Quan also for that important history lesson. What I'm noticing about this is that there's a nice invocation of the mean here, because he doesn't want something which is too high above his station, and he doesn't expect to have something too low below his station. So he's finding some sort of golden mean, which seems nice. And the other thing that struck me was he is accusing Zilu of carrying out some sort of charade or cheating. And then in the Slingerland translation I'm looking at, it says, if I have no ministers, and yet you act as if I have, who do you think I am going to fool? Am I going to fool heaven? So it sounds as if, even though Zilu is the instigator of this, somehow by extension, Confucius himself would be implicated in the charade, as if he himself had done that on his own behalf. I thought that was fascinating, that he was, in a sense, taking responsibility for what they had done, so that it would seem as if he himself was trying to fool heaven. Because he doesn't say, who do you think you are going to fool? Are you going to fool heaven? Thank you.
Yes, that's actually a very interesting point that you're making with that. It does seem that, yes, Confucius is concerned with essentially his role in the process and essentially his reputation subsequent to his death as well. So that, you know, he doesn't necessarily want to be remembered either. I guess it's a message for the future as well, as being deceitful of his position. Penny, then Kwan.
Yeah, I was just a little curious reading it about, I know that Confucius had handled, funerals at one point early in his life. And I was curious about what type things these retainers or ministers might be doing. Because it seemed like, unless there were like people visiting or something like that who would see them, then, I'm not sure who they were trying to deceive, unless it was some kind of a public performance. And I didn't know if these would be something like in certain places. I know that it was very important to have like mourners who followed the body through the streets and, showed how sorry they were that this person had died. I didn't know if that was the kind of thing a minister might do.
Do Jason or Kwan wish to comment on that, or?
Jason?
Yeah. Let me have a quick comment on this. I don't know much about actually what they are doing. Okay, so the text he is reading is 无臣而为有臣. Okay, 臣 means minister. So that means Confucius, okay, if you in a certain status, right, that's typical in everywhere, China, Europe, any feudalistic system, you have the situation, right? You are in a certain status, you will have your own minister, right? I am working for the Lord, but if I'm in certain state, I have my own minister. So that means you have an official title. So if I am dying, my funeral, not only my family will attend, right? My minister will attend. So during this time, Confucius has no minister. So it's kind of sad story. So if you are the president and then when you die and there's no people, government official attend your funeral, carry the fire the candle or carry the flag, right? Parade on the street, only have your family, okay, over like your grandson, your son, so it's kind of sad, put this way, okay? So Zilu tried to have his younger disciple to pretend as Confucius minister. So I think that's Zilu tried to do. And the Confucius answer is quite interesting, right? He said, am I going to deceive, fool the heaven? But most of people doing that. We probably see the funeral. Even in America, we see that, right? You will invite some celebrities, okay, to attend your father's funeral. So who you want to deceive? You want to fool. You want to fool the audience, the media. You want to fool people, not the heaven, right? But Confucius' answer is quite interesting. Who am I going to deceive? Okay, who am I going to fool? Am I going to fool the heaven? So I think his answer is quite interesting. So I like his answer, right? Just back a small question, okay? Penny, you asked whether or not the Confucius know the funeral or something. The answer is he is expert on the funeral because he said when he was young, he did a lot of humble job. Most scholars believe his humble job is arrange the funeral for high-ranking noble family, so that he is profession on funeral service.
Thank you for that explanation, Jason Kwan.
Yes, I will not be too long. I think that let's not forget that the division between religious and secularists is a very contemporary notion. Okay, in the past, the people were living in what I would call a Weltanschauung, okay, that German word meaning a certain representation of the world. And that representation of the world is hierarchical and religious because it's rooted in what the people at the time believe as a certain cosmic order, okay? And that cosmic order is of religious, of nature. That's one. Two, a small pedantic remark. In the case of Confucius, I would say that to translate Chen by minister is not completely wrong, but since I want to introduce a pedantic remark, maybe retainer is better in the case of Confucius. And I would say that in a certain sense, even if he did not have an official position at the time, he has what in Chinese we call man shen, okay, meaning the disciples and the students of his philosophical school. So in a certain way, they're kind of his retainers. And I would say that Zulu committed a mistake by exaggerating the grandeur of the ceremony. But Confucius was not dying by the road, that he said, because his disciples are his retainers.
Thank you very much for that, Quan. And so it doesn't look like there are many other comments. Mark, can you be brief? We want to keep moving here. Oh, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
Sorry. Quan's last remark made me think about if there is such a hierarchy of funerals, and we would expect it would have been rather elaborate, maybe there wasn't an appropriate ritual for someone who was, I don't know what Confucius was at the end, a scholar, an advisor, I'm not exactly sure, you would know. But maybe there was a gap that his Zulu and his disciples felt there wasn't the appropriate kind of li for that, how to bury someone like Confucius.
I think that's a fair assumption. In other words, he wasn't doing it out of any personal gain, that he was just doing it out of some kind of respect.
Yeah, from Quang and Mark is common, which is in a way defend for Zilu. Zilu is not all wrong. He has a reason to do that. Yeah, that I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was initially my thought, to be quite honest, is that he was trying to say this was a great man and that he wasn't necessarily going to be respected properly because he didn't hold a high position in government, and that his concern, or his appreciation, I should say, for Confucius warranted the approach that he was taking, and that Confucius was kind of much more humble in his approach, I would just say. Brian.
So Quan's last comment, and also from Mark and others, has reminded me of the role of ritual in other contexts, that makes me suspect that Confucius would not endorse or would not support a ritual that's not really embedded in the hierarchy. It's not that it's not an authentic ritual. And in other words, I don't know, but I suspect that in China, if you were, let's say, in the royal family or if you wanted to accede to heaven from the royal family, you had the ministers perform the ritual, and in that way you might accede to heaven. But having those pretending to have ministers that aren't really appointed and aren't a part of the hierarchy is not going to have an effect. So what I'm thinking of is the Egyptian funerary rituals. You all know the pyramids and the rest, but there's a huge ritual involved, a huge, what some people call a technology involved, where the pharaoh is in effect blasted into the afterlife, where he continues to help his successors reign. And it was only the pharaoh who could be blasted into the afterlife. There was this technology that involved, well, it varied over the centuries, but in the Pyramid Age, it involved secret doors and rituals. The Book of the Dead was a set of prayers and recitations that the pharaoh should make to ensure that he is granted access to heaven. But nobody else could get that. If you were a common person in ancient Egypt, if you got yourself somehow buried with those the words on your casket, and this is in the early period, you were not going to get blasted into heaven because only the pharaoh qualified. Later on, more and more people wanted to get blasted into heaven, and so it was yes, the sooner over time, the scribes and the other members of the royal family and the other government officials, they could access this technology, and it was considered authentic and valid and effective. But the other people could not, and there's kind of an evolution where it was expanded over the centuries. But I can imagine that I suspect that in Confucius might be referencing here the fact that pretending to have ministers and pretending to be in a position where you can get blasted into heaven is just not on. Whatever his position is in life is what the ritual should be in accordance with that position. That another, the Vedic rituals, again, that's where I'm suspecting it might be like this in China. In the Vedic rituals, the Brahmin, the priest, in effect, could compel the gods to do something by performing the proper ritual. But if it's not, if it's not proper for someone in Confucius's position to accede to a certain afterlife, having ministers perform certain rituals would be pointless. It's just not effective. And so the one question I have about the translation is, Mark has come up with one on that one sentence that the deception would be by Confucius. The other is that the conception is by his associate. I'm wondering if it's also possible just to translate that phrase in the passive and say, would heaven be deceived? Doesn't matter who does it. It matters whether or not heaven is deceived. And a fake ritual with fake people is not going to deceive heaven.
Let me answer Brian's question, right? First, I have to translate as who am I deceived? Because in the ancient text, usually a lot of time, analect has no subject. But unfortunately, this one has a subject. He say I. So I have to put I on that. So that's number one. Secondly, I would not agree on ancient China's religion, which that's just my opinion, to put this way. Okay, I don't see the house minister or retainer you want to translate is equivalent to the Egyptian fairy or other Western religions. You need to have certain people soul, the dying soul will go to the heaven. I at least I don't see this way, because at least in the Confucian school, because they only focus on this life, not otherworldliness. So at least my understanding is this. So they are talking about what am I doing? The house minister has no role to bring the soul of Confucius to heaven. That's irrelevant. At least that's my understanding.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that, Jason. So shall we move on to in chapter 9, verse 13?
Verse 13, Zigong said, there is a beautiful gem here. Should I lay it up in a case and keep it? Or should I seek for a good price and sell it? The master said, sell it, sell it. But I would wait for one to offer the price.
Benny, Ahmad, do you want to, or? would you-
Sure. Book 9, verse 13. So Gong said, if you had a piece of beautiful jade here, would you put it away safely in a box, or would you try to sell it for a good price? The master said, of course I would sell it. Of course I would sell it. All I am waiting for is the right offer.
You know, I'm actually going to go ahead and read it because mine's just a slightly different. Zigong said, here's a piece of beautiful jade. Shall I wrap it up and keep it in a chest, or seek a good merchant and sell it? The master said, I would sell it. I would sell it. I'm waiting for a merchant. So just a little bit, it's slightly different, but be interested in hearing people's interpretation. Number 3.
Okay, let me offer my answer. Joe is correct.
Okay, that's one
my
of these times I was going to read yours just to say.
the reason it is, I think offer a good price sounds more reasonable, or that's the way we will talk. That's why most of the translators will say, I'm waiting for a good price. But unfortunately, I look at the Chinese word, it talk about 善股, okay? That means merchant, okay? Good merchant, these 2 words means good merchant, okay? So you have to use merchant, okay? So and he talked about jade, okay? So it's not just a regular precious stone or something, okay? But it's jade, okay? So this one is Zigong again, and then probably you remember at the beginning, Zigong also talk about polish the jade, quote from the book of Old, right? And then when Confucius in the state of Wei, right, they had some coup, right? They don't know which side Confucius will state. So Zigong go to ask Confucius, and Zigong never direct ask Confucius, you are a Democrat or Republican. He just asks, oh, how do you think about Bo Yi and the Su Qi, right? So that's the way Zigong talk, because he is being considered great in literature. Okay, so again, Zigong never talk directly. He just talk about something. Okay, Zigong said, I have a precious jade. Should I place it in a box or conceal it? Or should I find a good merchant and sell it? The master said, sell it, but I will wait for a good merchant. So that's Confucius' answer. I don't think I need to explain, what Confucius meant, right? So who is the jade? Who is the merchant? I think it's obvious. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Mon, please.
I agree with Jason, but for those of us not as familiar with the Confucian allegories, because Jason's right, when he was talking about how rarely you read anything in the Analects that is allegorical. Everything generally is very straightforward, or at least at first blush it is. This is one of those rare occasions where everything is metaphor. Everything is symbolic. What jade does someone have? The precious jade of their refined knowledge, their refined character, of polishing and refining their self to be more like a junsa. And should you keep it hidden away up on a mountain, hermit, hidden from society, or should you go and sell it? And he says, sell, but wait for a good merchant. And Jason's right. The translation of merchant as opposed to price is very important, because he's saying you need to sell your talent to someone worthy of purchasing your talent, not that they offer you a great price. Because if you really strain the allegory, you could say, I'd wait for a good price. And what by price he means that what will be shelled out is worth actually. But no, I agree. The fact that they are speaking about wait for the right person is significant, because Confucius is saying, go sell your talents, but wait to serve somebody worthy of your talent. And this is a very famous verse out of the Analects. I'd say most scholars, most students of Confucianism, they are familiar with this verse, because it is such an unveiled metaphor, but it captures a whole lot of the essence of his teachings.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thank you, Ahmad. You know, one of the things that I was thinking about is that distinction that you had actually made when it comes to the price, and not using it, like necessarily making it a financial transaction, so to speak. You know, one of the interpretations is that I read is that it's unnecessary to chase down someone in order to sell your jade to a good merchant. A good merchant will find you, and that you should be patient and waiting for the merchant. You know, but the metaphor, how you explained it, I thought it was well done. So thank you, Jason and Armand. Does anybody else have any comments?
Joseph, could I just say something about this beautiful metaphor?
Please.
I was thinking, why does he pick jade as the comparison? And I would maybe just guess that it's solid and ancient. And
I can answer that actually very simply.
come on.
Jade was one of the most precious and revered substances in ancient China. It was seen as a highly refined substance. I don't know how else to say that. Whether you talk about what it was refined of, that's a whole nother matter. But jade was something refined, something precious, and it's only shown its beauty through manipulating. You didn't just find a hunk of jade and, oh, it looks great. It needed to be polished, it needed to be smoothed, it needed to be further refined by labor and hands. So it symbolically is very significant.
Yeah, it was also known for its purity as well, if I remember, because we covered jade in the past, and it's like kind of moral integrity as well, as a symbol of moral integrity.
I sorry to interrupt. I would say pure probably not the feature of jade. Okay, that probably too platonic. Okay, so
okay, Fair enough. Quan.
Yes, Amon is very right to say that jade represent the gentleman or the moral qualities of the gentleman. And there are 4 properties of the jade that are equal to 4 properties of the gentleman. If
I
make
think I
sense.
lost your
Okay.
voice, right?
No, I
Okay, do you hear me now? Do you hear me now?
Yeah. It's better.
Okay, so I said that there are 4 properties of the jade that are equivalent to the qualities of the gentleman. At the touch, jade can be soft and cool, okay? And that softness is also equivalent to that courtesy and the softness of the gentleman in his behavior to others. And it's cool by the touch because it's also in the behavior of the gentleman to be expected to be cool. Okay, and at the same time, it stay unchanged. Okay, because jade will not decay. Okay, it will stay also always the same. So it represents too that constancy in the quality of the heart and of the mind and of the soul of the gentleman. And so those physical quality of the jade are symbols of the intellectual and moral qualities of a junzi, of a gentleman.
Thank you for that clarification, Quan. Very much appreciated. If there are no other comments, we will continue to move on to 9:14 in order to keep moving along. Doesn't seem like there's any other comments. So Penny.
Okay. Book 9, chapter 14. The master was wishing to go and live among the 9 wild tribes of the East. Someone said, "They are rude. How can you do such a thing?" The master said, "If a superior man dwell among them, what rudeness would there be?"
Interesting. Aman, would you like to?
Yeah, absolutely. Book 9, verse 14. The master wanted to settle amongst the 9 barbarian tribes of the East. Someone said, "But could you put up with their uncouth ways?" The master said, "Once a gentleman settles amongst them, what uncouthness will there be?"
I'll go ahead and read mine. It's in the same, vein. So the master wished to live in the land of the 9 Yi tribes. Someone asked, "It is a mean land. How can you deal with it?" The master said, "A noble person used to live there. What meanness can there be?" Slightly different, but go ahead, Jason.
I believe this one is simple. Confucius wanted to relocate and stay with the Eastern 9 tribes. The word "yi," okay, that's why in Joe's version called "yi," okay, so means east because like a Greek, right, or treats non-Greek as barbarian, but Chinese are more sophisticated, so that means Chinese has more detailed classification for the barbarian. So in the east called Yi, and in the south called Man, in the north I think called Di, and in the west called Rong. So they have a different name for different kind of barbarian. So Confucius wanted to relocate and stay with Eastern 9 tribes. So could be means Korean or Japan, this kind of area. So so someone said they are uncivilized, or you want to call it a means or something. What will you do? There's no civilization. What Confucius would do? The master said, when a junzi dwell with them, how can they be uncivilized? Okay, so number one question is why Confucius want to move to the live with uncivilized tribes? Okay, I think that would be similar to in book 5, right? When Confucius complained about the situation in China, he's thinking about go seafaring, and then he want to bring Zilu with him. So could be the same reason. That's why Confucius was thinking about moving to Japan or Korean, which on the east with that. The last sentence is important, right? The master say, when the Junzi dwell with them, how can they be uncivilized? So I think the Confucius means as a Junzi, okay, he will change the tribe to a civilized society. That's the one way to interpret. Another way to think about it is more Taoism thinking, right? So at least that's a peaceful land. And then if I'm a Junzi, then I'm always a Junzi. Doesn't matter, they are civilized or barbarian. I can live the way I want to live. So I think there's two ways of interpret the last sentence. Yeah, thank you.
Ahmad, would you like to go ahead and comment?
Yeah, this is one of the quotes that I find to be an off the cuff. It feels very much like, oh, we should just row, out to sea. And, oh, but we don't have lumber. That was, his sort of sardonic way of saying, I really want to just give up. And here I feel like it's once again sort of that I really just want to give up, because the barbarian tribes were not seen as a viable alternative to the civilized world. And I'm sure in his bones, Confucius knew there's no way to reside outside of civilized society and have anything resembling civilization. He even says, if a master is not worth it, you shouldn't be trying to, curry favor with them. And so here it's like somebody at the end of the Roman Empire saying, maybe I'll just go and vacation with the Visigoths. They don't seem so bad. And, they could use a little Roman culture amongst their people. You could say that, but nobody is going to believe you that that is what you mean. I don't think Confucius actually had any intention of going anywhere. This was another, all is lost. I should just sail off into the sunset. But he is also in that despair, in that sort of his very wry way, also putting down sort of a place marker of a junzi should be so much that their civility radiates from them in an almost, mesmeric force, causing civilization to arise around them. Otherwise, how do you explain how we got civilized in the first place without some sages that could do this with the rabble that was our people a couple thousand years ago? So it's glib, but it's interestingly glib, and I think it has a challenge for the reader to be the junzi who could do this.
Yeah, I very much appreciate your analysis, because I initially looked at this as from an optimistic point of view, in that a junzi could go into any territory and actually raise the civility of the tribe or the area that he was in, so that there was somewhat of an idealistic approach that I was taking. But I very much appreciate that this could be a moment of desperation, being almost like I'm in civilization and it's not all that great, and I'm gonna go and just retreat to the uncivilized world, and it's going to be the same. It's it could be interpreted both ways. I'm choosing the optimistic one. So just I don't know. Maybe that's just where I am right now. Ask me next week and I may change it. Go ahead, Quan. Does anybody else?
Yeah. I have to admit that I favor Ammon's interpretation because during his long exile from 497 BCE to 484 BCE, the last time he got a true opportunity to do something serious with a powerful state, it was in 2 or 3 years before his return to Lu. He returned to Lu in 484 BCE. So it was probably in 489 BCE that King Chao of the Chu state, the big southern state, offered him a possibility to be to do some reforms in his own kingdom. But unhappily, that King Chao of Chu died in 489 BCE precisely, and his son did not renew the offer to Confucius. And so Confucius at that time was probably aware that his political career is finished. So you see that in Confucius, in the Analects, you can see certain statements that when express his messianic understanding of his mission, his political mission, and he would blurt out sometimes, like in this one, a moment of despair because from 489 BCE, at the death of King Chao of Chu, I'm quite sure that the old man understood that his political career is finished. So he still has about 10 years to live since he died in 479 BCE. And during that last decade of his life, he devoted himself to his second mission, or let's say the other mission at this having probably the same importance in his mind, meaning to devote himself to uplift people in their epistemological growth. And I want to be optimistic like you, but for the second mission, probably he got a true solace from that devotion to that second mission, and he did not die completely despair.
So Huang, you talk about the second mission is doing the Chunqiu?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I would say that would be the how his disciple would present it, and I would say that that's how we receive it. That I want to interpret that the last decade of his life was not the last 10 years of a desperate old man, but simply of a wise man having understood that it's not the time now, but he want to prepare, he want to create an epistemological program for future generation to achieve.
Yeah, thank you, Kwang. And just let everyone know, that's Kwang is talking about is Chunqiu, the ancient Lu history, and it's a very ancient book. And Kwang is going to present on the February 11th, okay, on the Asian philosophy group, and that's a good one.
I'm looking forward to it. February 11th, you said?
That's Kwang is good. That's in the February 11th, right? That's the date we set up, we scheduled.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for that. And so if there are no other comments, then let's keep moving along here to 9:15.
I guess I do have a question about what Quan was saying about setting out the epistemological foundation so that something like state that he envisioned could be realized in the future. I've only been in the group and I haven't read the Analects before, so I don't remember so far reading many references to the future. Is the future an important category somehow in the Analects and in his thought?
I was going to say, can I take a crack at this real quick?
Please.
Quan, I know I'm answering for you, but I think I absolutely saw what you were saying. I think the future is implied throughout because Confucius is teaching, and he's teaching for a reason. You don't teach without a belief that there is hope for your students to go and do something. And he is very hard and very severe with his students, but for the best of reasons, because he makes it clear you are to contribute to the world around you, to society. Ren is one of these key values. When you ask about, creating something, an epistemology, we have institutions in our world that we call epistemic institutions. And that just is a very fancy way of saying institutions that knowledge is derived from. So we think of like colleges as an example, but the courts are another example that knowledge comes from them. What he wanted was to create an epistemic institution out of his students that would perpetuate itself. You're going to learn from me, but you are going to continue to learn, and you are going to continue to, and he succeeded in doing it. That was actually his great legacy, and it's hard to argue with the result of 21, 22, I'd even say 23 centuries of ongoing attempts to learn from what he began.
Thank you for that explanation, Aman. That was excellent. So we'll go to 9:15. Unless Quan, do you want to? You're okay. Okay.
Okay, Book 9, Chapter 15. The master said, I returned from Wei to Lu, and then the music was reformed, and the pieces in the royal songs and praise songs all found their proper places.
Thank you for that, Penny. Aman, will you be so kind as to read?
Yeah. Book 9, verse 15. The master said, it was after my return from Wei to Lu that the music was put right, with the ya and the song being assigned their proper place.
I will, I can go ahead actually and share really quickly. The master said, after I returned to Lu from Wei, the music was setified. Thus, the Yao odes and the song hymns acquired their proper order.
Okay, I believe this one is Confucius is talking about it's a technical job, right? That's the way I read it. The master said, I returned to the state of Lu from the state of Wei. That means he finished his, you want to call it exile, or he job searching and come back to his hometown. And then I put the music. Here, Chinese use music, but I believe he is talking about the Book of Ode. So I put the music in order. Royal court song and the sacrificial ceremony songs are all now in their right places. So I think, and some scholars also believe this way, is today people heard about the book, the ancient poetry, right, called the Book of Ode, 诗经, have 306 poems. They have the three set, right, so-called Feng, Ya, Song. That's why Joe's version will read as Ya and the Song in the right order, because they have the three sections and means the three kind of songs, okay, or poetries. Okay, the first called Feng means the song for different states. Okay, so and the second called Ya Okay, that's the royal court song. That's for the royal ceremony, the court song. And then last one called song, which means the sacrificial ceremony songs. So there are three kinds. And I believe what this text talking about is Confucius, after he come back from his trip, he just like Kwang said, he has his second job is doing. One is writing 春秋, another comment on 春秋, and another one could be he start to organize this ancient poetry in a certain order. That's why he put in the right place. Probably means physical in the right place. So he organized in this way. But you can read in a different way, more metaphoric ways, right? He just put every music in the right way, okay, not just talk about the book, but a lot of scholars believe this one he is talking about, he compile, edit the book of odes in this way, and which the way we will still read today.
Thank you, Amon.
I want to expand on what Jason was saying about putting the songs in their right place. And this requires a little trip into sort of ancient Chinese archaeology. If you find ancient Chinese books, they're bamboo strips, and they are usually bound with a piece of silk, and they're rolled up into a thick scroll. As has already been mentioned, Chinese are very fast and loose about the idea of subject, about the idea of verb, and there's no such thing as punctuation, which means you kind of had to have it laid out the right way to be able to start reading and go from beginning to end. And if that binding got broken and those bamboo slips just kind of fell into a pile, then you were sunk. Unless you actually already knew the text, it was going to be a monstrous job to be able to find the beginning, the end, and every subsequent what we'd call page in between. So to actually physically put a song into its right place was a labor. It was a gigantic labor. And it's something that is even done now when archaeologists find ancient text, though there's enough duplicates around often to be able to say, okay, so here I'm looking at the first page, here I'm looking at the second. But this was something, Mark, you mentioned the Dao De Ching, that befuddled the finders of the Guodian text, because that was bamboo strips that had been unbound. But what they discovered after careful scholarship was that they were reversed. The first half of the Tao Te Ching was in the second half of the book, and the second half in the first half in this oldest version that existed. And that's not just careless, recreation, that's confirmed. So it is a real feat to put things into their proper place when it comes to ancient Chinese text.
Thank you for that explanation, Amon. Does anybody else have any comments that they would like to share about this particular chapter?
I would just like to ask, I know Jason left for his New Year's celebration. In my translation, it says music was rectified. And I can't remember what all of your other translations said. But when I see that word rectified, it makes me think of that passage from The Great Learning, when the hearts are rectified. How does it go? when their thoughts are sincere, the hearts are rectified. And that's just the translation that I'm familiar with. When the hearts are rectified, the person, is cultivated. So I'm wondering, in this string of causal relations, I guess is the way I understand that part of the great learning. What is the real meaning of rectified? And is it really the same word in Chinese being used here? I'm just not sure at all. And is music implicitly part of this great chain that makes up the great learning? Is music implicit in that at some step, or maybe at every step?
Jason, do you want to actually chime in really quickly because you're about to leave?
Yeah, yes, Mark, you are correct. The word called 正 is exactly the same word in the great learning. Okay, so correct, rectify the music is the, if you want to do the word-to-word translation. Okay, but if you do rectify the music, that will be same as rectifies your heart mind. So that means music was wrong. I'm going to make it correct, which is possible. Confucius do the same thing because he complained in the state of 正. Okay, the song is kind of bad. Okay, and so it's possible he want to correct the music because it's not right. Okay, but if I read it in the way of he is reorganize the poetry. Okay, because the poetry and the music are side by side, you can sing. Okay, so if I read this one as he physically read the text and some music and put in the right order, then I will translate not as rectify. I translate put in the order because you want to put in the right place. So I think either way are correct, but I choose one way. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Quan.
I would like to mention first once again the historical context. Okay, let's not forget that the epistemological mission that Confucius upheld, there was a innovative part, but there was the part of the transmission of the legacy of the Zhou royal house. And according to tradition, he edited the book of poetry, the I Ching, the book of documents, etc., for the future generation. So it was very important during his time for a gentleman to be precisely knowledgeable about that cultural legacy of the Zhou dynasty. For example, if you don't know the poems, you would not be a very good servant for your state, because in diplomatic encounters, if you don't know to quote the right poem for the right moment, you would be looked down and you would not serve your prince with a high performance. The other thing about the Tashui, the great learning, is that precisely what is done, the book of poetry, the book of documents, the I Ching, and the Chun Chu, and so on, is to set the cultural context. Okay, but the Tashui, who was written by Zhengzi, one of his major disciples, is precisely to apply that to the epistemological growth. Okay, and if you remember you have 8 steps in the Tashui. Okay, and the number 5 is simply say to cultivate yourself. Okay, but to cultivate yourself at the number 5 is only a summary for 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and 6, 7, 8 are the practical application once you have worked on your mind and your soul and your heart. Okay, because 6 is to put order in your family. 7 is to assist in the governance of the state. And 8 is to bring peace to the world. So that is the practical application once you have a, let's say, high enough epistemological development. But at the same time, the fact that you put into practice your epistemological growth will reinforce also your epistemological growth, since you are going through practical ordeals, if I may say so, within your family, within the government, and in the world for those who have political responsibilities. But 1, 2, 3, 4 is truly to develop your mind, and one is very simple. One is to align your affairs, meaning to put order in your practical affairs. Okay, and 2 would be to extend your knowledge and your understanding. 3 would be to be sincere, to uplift your sincerity. Are you serious in your in your endeavor of epistemological growth, and to focus your capacity to be attentive. Okay, and if you're capable of that, well, you can go further in your stuff and balance your mind. Okay, which is the number 4. Okay, balance your mind here means precisely that you are not overwhelmed by the your emotional state. Okay, because we human are body, intellect, body, emotion, intellect, and soul. Okay, so you have to be balanced in those different components, so you're not too emotional but not too rational either, so that you would be the gentleman. Precisely, the gentleman being the person having balanced his mind, meaning that he is the living embodiment of the 4 cardinal virtues: the inner sense of justice, valor, wisdom, and humanity. And that is the core of the epistemological program. But the cultural stuff, okay, the Chun Chu, the book of poetry, of documents, the Yi Ching, and those things are the historical and cultural legacy, which is part also in the training of the gentleman.
Thank you, Juan. Are there any other comments regarding 9:15? If not, we'll go to 9:16.
I will just briefly say, if anyone hadn't seen, I put an example of a bamboo book in the chat.
Thank you for that.
I
Penny,
don't see it. I'm not sure. Maybe it's because I'm on a phone.
it's there. It's yeah, right under Jason's last post. Go ahead, Penny. I'm sorry.
That's okay, I wasn't sure. Book 9, chapter 16. The master said, abroad to serve the high ministers and nobles, at home to serve one's father and elder brothers, in all duties to the dead, not to dare, not to exert oneself, and not to be overcome of wine. Which one of these things do I attain to?
Thank you, Penny. I will go ahead and read my version as a second version, then you'll go ahead and read Jason's. I'm assuming, yes. The master said, to serve the dukes and ministers in the community, to serve the elderly relatives at home, not to dare to avoid helping in mounting matters, or morning matters, I'm sorry, not to be affected by drinking, which of these is found in me?
Okay, let me share. Can you all see my screen all right?
Yes.
Okay. Book 9, verse 16. The master said, "When outside my home, I served my lord and ministers. When at home, I served my seniors. I never took funerals lightly. I never had trouble drinking. What else could I have done?" And just to add my commentary, I won't go through line by line. You can see some of Jason's notes, which are always as interesting as his translation. He's talking about being a young man who is Shao at home, and that was at first order that helped develop him. That when he served seniors, he began to sort of extend that Shao to others. And when he eventually served lords and ministers, it became a piety that was extended. He basically extended the bonds of fraternal piety as far and as wide as he could until they were breached above his head. But he said, "I never took funerals lightly." This goes back to the job he had, but it also goes back to the absolute penultimate importance in funerary rites and ancestor worship as the first true religion of all of China. And he mentions drinking, but not getting drunk. I like this as a verse because it ticks off almost point by point a reiteration of everything else in the Analects. Shao, check. Faleo, or Ren, check. Li, check. You can just see one step after another how each of the things that he has preached and attempted to teach, he has encapsulated in just a few sentences about his own decorum and his own behaviors. And I think the drinking was significant because he says, "I never had trouble drinking." Not that he didn't drink, which is almost nobody is perfect, but all good things in their measure. What else could I have done but to have done what I did? Almost kind of like Jason says, almost a rhetorical, that is it. That's all she wrote for me. That I didn't have any other destiny but to do this. Feels weird to do both Jason's and my commentary, but I'll allow it.
Well, it's appreciated. Yeah, I mean, I actually had walked away with something similar. And it was basically, asking what capability do I have to actually practice these three things. But I also thought that the idea of temperance, specifically when it came to drinking, amongst the multiple translations that I looked at, was something that I felt was an interesting point. So, Quan.
And here I would like to make a comment on what I would call the continuity of the school of the Rujia, okay? Because what we call in the West Confucianism is called in Chinese, as many of you probably already know, Rujia, that we can translate by the school of the scholars, but it can be debated, of course. And that school of the scholars existed already under the Shang dynasty, uh, about 5 centuries before Confucius. Okay, but that school evolved with time. Okay, at the beginning, they were mostly master of ceremonies, of rituals, and of divination. And Confucius had a kind of job related, as Jason said, to the funerals of the grandees. Okay, so it was related to ritual ceremonies and divination. But at the same time, that Ruja evolved with the time and on many centuries, And that section 9.16 is very interesting because it illustrated precisely the number 6, 7, 8 of the 8 stages of the statue. Okay, because number 6 was to put order in your family. Then he was talking about how to serve the elders at home, assist in the governance of the state when abroad, servant, court, grandees, and minister, and bring peace to the world. So that Rujia, through the flow of centuries, was refining more and more its goal, okay, its epistemological goal and its ritualistic goals, because epistemology is acting on your mind and your heart, and rituals is to translate it in your behavior. So there is a intimate relation, a logical intimate relations between the epistemological growth and the adequacy of your behavior. So, and that Rujia kept on till the end of the Chinese Empire to refine that that companionship of epistemological growth, meaning refining your mind and your heart and your soul, and how to translate it in your practical behavior. And now, as many of you probably knows, there's a kind of revival of Confucianism in China because precisely of that awareness of the companionship between the epistemological dimension and the behavioral dimension, or in terms of the Rujia, the ritualistic dimension. The rituals here is understood as the proper behavior of someone having achieved his epistemological growth. And when we will read chapter 10 of the Analects, chapter 10 is special because chapter 10 is the description of the ideal sage by Confucius's disciples. And in chapter 10, you don't have the master said the thing or stuff like that, but it was because it was the ideal description of the perfect sage. And of course, in the mind of the disciples of Confucius, that perfect sage was Confucius naturally.
Thank you for that, Kwan. Does anybody else wish to comment on 916? I really appreciate how you actually demonstrated how ritual and the epistemological ends of it actually come together. If there are no other comments for 916, let's go to 917.
All right. 9, chapter 17. The master standing by a stream said, "It passes on just like this, not ceasing day or night."
And I'll go ahead and remind the master said, standing by a stream, said, "What goes by is like this. It never stops day or night."
All right. I'll read it first and then I'll offer my commentary. The master stood by a river and said, "It goes on like this, never ceasing, day and night." It is all too tempting and all too easy to start drawing Taoist comparisons because the subject of this quote is water. But it needs to be mentioned, this precedes Taoism of a sort. And so sentiments like this would not be seen as
to pick up a DoorDash order
out of school, as it were.
I'm sorry.
Hang on a second. I've got something.
I got it. Yeah, it was somebody was off mute.
Yeah. You wouldn't be like stepping foot out of your own turf to be flirting with ideas that would later develop within Taoism. When he talks about it goes on like this, never ceasing day and night. What is the it he's talking about? The learning, the Tao, the world, the struggle. It's impossible to know what the subject was that he was speaking of when he said it goes on like this. You can speculate, and there are certainly better and worse speculations for that. But what it became down the road into the Taoist minds were the Tao. The Tao goes on like water. The water became the best way of representing how to conceptualize something as nebulous as the Tao. That is not necessarily what Confucius was staring at and gawking at. He could have meant, as Jason points out, any number of things here. For my personal opinion, I do think he meant his own Tao, lowercase t, or the grinding and polishing of making oneself a junsa, of making oneself better. That, in my opinion, is what the it goes on like this, never ceasing day and night, is what he's referring to. The effort required for someone to elevate themselves to that level of a junsa. Because as hard as he was on his students and as severe as he was much harder on himself as sort of the final determination of whether what he believed he had to say was correct or not. And so that's an opinion, but yeah, I just want to caution too much comparison to Taoism, because this isn't necessarily metaphysical. It could be, but it does not necessarily have to be.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I was trying to figure out that what it was as well, and then and if you take it in the context of this what Confucius speaks about often, or most often, is obviously the cultivation of one's character and virtue. So I think about that in terms of from the beginning of your life till the end of life. That is a ongoing pursuit. So that this is something that is never fully achieved, where you or you're never stop striving for the ideal. That's just was my takeaway from this particular verse. Does anybody else wish to share their thoughts? There were a lot of different interpretations from some of the commentaries that I read, but
Yeah, Slingerland cites another possible interpretation, that it's a reference to the flow of time and the passage of time.
yes,
Maybe an expression of Confucius's pessimism. That his ideas were not able to be realized.
yes, I also saw something along the lines with where they were referring to the passage of time, and yeah, I have the Slingerland translation as well. So yeah, I'm familiar with what you're referring to, Mark. Does anybody else wish to share? I mean, I initially had a Heraclitus kind of thought when I first read it, but I didn't think that would have been wrong. Oh, go ahead, Quan.
I would say that Confucius being Confucius and the school, the scholars being very much focused on politics and social relations, how it flows on, never ceasing day, night and day. For me, it's a kind of melancholic reflection on history and on universal history, and precisely on the failure of his political endeavor. But not losing completely hope, because he had the other epistemological dimension.
Thank you for that, Quan. Does anybody else wish to share? If not, shall we take a look at? I'm in the wrong version. What do you think? We could finish one more.
I think we could do one more. The next one is very short and it's a great note to leave on.
Okay, let's do it then. Penny, and would you like to go ahead?
Sure. Verse 18. The master said, I have not seen one who loves virtue as he loves beauty.
Mine says, the master said, I have never seen a person who loves virtue as he loves beautiful women.
Shall I read Robert Eno?
Yes, please.
This one says,
This is like amazing how it is. Yes,
I have
please.
yet to see a man who loved virtue as much as sex.
Oh, wow. Okay. So I think that ours is, or, you know, my version is a little bit closer to the version. And
the prize goes to
to
Eno.
Yeah, it does, because that's very much Jason's interpretation.
It's pretty straightforward. The master said, I've never seen one who loves virtue as much as he loves sex. The word in question here is 子, and the amazing, what I love about it is this word, which I will drop in the chat, actually is the same word in modern Chinese for color. If you just want to say something is, you know, filled with color or colorful, it's but it is I won't even say a euphemism. It's not a veiled euphemism. It is the actual term. The other use of this word is sex. It does mean it. It is astonishing, I believe, to Confucian values to think that the master would be quite so crass or quite so blunt, but it's unmistakable that what he was saying was, boy, this is a teacher with a classroom full of boys. You're going to have a hard time staying focused on your work and developing your virtue. The first pretty girl walks down the street, or pretty boy, I don't think he necessarily cared all that much, if what your mind is on is sex. It will consume you. It will drown out any other lesson I have to teach you. And I think that that lesson has been reiterated and reiterated throughout history by multiple thinkers. There's few things more distracting and more powerful.
So you don't think it's just Confucius being humble about his teaching ability?
No,
Like,
no, I don't.
It's interesting because one of the things that one of the commentaries that I had read was that how, on a more philosophical level, how sex refers more to the human desire, the human mind, whereas the virtue actually is much closer to the Tao mind, and that this is not totally dissimilar to how Socrates would talk about the idea of a spirit and the idea of our desires, our more basic desires. So it's kind of making a separation between those two. So it's interesting to see that put out so bluntly. Anyway, just a thought. I will say I agree. After all that, like, you know, nice. That's what it is. So, go ahead, Quan. Give us the final answer.
I think that Confucius here is being very realistic, and
Yeah.
and it's about precisely the epistemological growth. Okay, because what is the epistemological growth? There are many definitions. Okay, but one definition that can be given in relation to that paragraph is that the more you evolve epistemologically, your objects of desire will change. Okay, and at the basic level, it's food and sex that are your two basic objects of desire. And in Confucianism, I don't remember the number of the chapters, but there's one statement that is awesome for me. And that is, it's normal to desire good food and good sex. There's nothing wrong with that. The only thing that you have to get good sex and good food by the right means and not by the lowly means. And Confucianism is a philosophy that can be very lofty, but it can be very down to earth too, because it takes into account the epistemological development of everyone. And I would like also to say that "sir," right, as Ammon say, means sex in ancient times, but even nowadays, it's a poetic way to say sex or anything that has a material dimension, a corporeal dimensions. Okay, wealth, beautiful paintings, beautiful clothing, beautiful bodies, of course, is seen as color, meaning things that would impress our senses, perceptions, metaphorically speaking. And the last thing that I would say, that I wouldn't be fast, this paragraph is related to a historical incident. When Confucius was visiting the Principality of Wei, W-E-Y, and not the later Wei, which is another one, Nanzi, who was the much younger spouse of the Duke, wanted to have a conversation with Confucius, and the old Duke insisted that Confucius granted that audience to his wife. And Confucius was not too enthusiastic, but since he was eager to get a position from the Duke, he accepted the interview. And later on, they went for a promenade in the city. And Nanzi was on the first carriage, and Confucius was in the second carriage. And the inhabitants of the capital city of the Wei Principality made mocking comments on Confucius that the sage is coming after the beauty.
Thank you for that, Quan. Go ahead, Brian.
Well, I'll just note then that based on this passage, it's the salvation of humanity that sex doesn't take so long. It leaves a lot more time for virtue.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's true.
That's true. But I want to say that for the gentleman, sex is important, but it's not an obsession. That's the nuance.
Yes.
We're not sages, though, right?
I would
just point out, I agree with all of this. As some of you know, we had a president who was a Rhodes Scholar and renowned for doing the New York Times crossword puzzle while taking his morning meetings. And while doing both of these, could rattle things off. He was a brilliant man. He also was impeached because of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. All the education, all the refining in the world does not constitute somebody's virtue overcoming this desire per se. This is a different skill to work on entirely, not succumbing to your craving for se. I figured I had to use the Chinese word just for a little color.
Yeah, but the Western word that would translate "sir" perfectly for me would be libido.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something where it's interesting because it kind of builds on the previous chapter, where there was a discussion of temperance, and actually we were talking about the drinking aspect of that. If you are an alcoholic by like nature, in the sense that you would find that to be incredibly difficult. So I think that just a way of saying that there are desires that are just a challenge to overcome, and some more than others. And for most, this would be one of those desires that would be very difficult to choose virtue over that particular desire. Although it should be noted, many people do.
I don't know if I have 1 minute for a clinical note.
Go ahead, please.
Because in the case of people having toxicomaniac problems, okay, dependency on drugs, alcohol, like that, I know that in modern medicine, there's a tendency to grant a certain importance to the biological dimension, okay? But I would say that the psychological dimension is quite important, because for people having long-term problems with alcohol or drug or other disruptive behavior, the old epistemological growth interpretation in my mind is much more powerful, because if you know that person on a long time period, most of the time you notice that that person did not develop higher desires, since all his libido is captivated by the basic desires of sex and food, and I include alcohol and stuff like that in food.
Oh, thank you for that, Quan. There are no other comments. Then
Is that hand still up from earlier? Penny,
I think so.
No comment. No comment.
Yeah, that's from previous. I want to thank everybody for joining us here this evening, and just briefly announce what some upcoming events, as Jason has already put in the chat.
I've got to run.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Good evening, all.
For your
I'll
time,
see you next
as
week.
always.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Oh, 新年快乐.
Yeah, 新年快乐.
We have Jason's being up in the chat again. That's the Asian Philosophies group. He put a link to this week's session, so feel free to I'm going to put it in the chat again, just so everybody. And then for 52 Living Ideas, we have tomorrow is considered Comprehensivist Wednesdays, and that's done in conjunction with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. We'll be covering Aristotle's Poetics, Plato's Republic, Shakespeare, and Mimesis. And that's being led by Phil, and that's a really interesting book. He's covering a book written by, well, his last name was Arabak, but I forget the first name actually, and it's called Mimesis. So, and I don't have it in front of me, but anyway, so that is tomorrow, and then Thursday will be Gospel of John. We'll be covering chapter 14, and on Friday this week we'll be continuing our Bhagavad Gita monthly discussions, and this weekend on Sunday we will continue our series on Buckminster Fuller that was inspired. Actually, I should say Saturday night we have a very special event. Harold Nelson, the author of The Design Way, will be back again to discuss the launching of his design flight school, as he's calling it, but it's a design thinking type of approach to the graduate program. And then on top, and then we also have Curtis Faust at 5 p.m. on Sunday as well. That's also being led by Phil, who will be leading tomorrow's discussion. And then 9 o'clock on Sunday evening, we have Synergetics by Buckminster Fuller, and that is part of our Buckminster Fuller series. So if you're not familiar with Synergetics, Kirby Erner will be actually doing that presentation. He simplifies Synergetics in a way that it's accessible. So that would be a very good meetup to come to if you're interested in the ideas of Buckminster Fuller, and specifically in this particular instance, geometry of thought. And that has been a very successful series thus far. Anyway, so everyone, thank you for your time and consideration this evening and attending, and hopefully I'll see everyone again next week.
Ciao.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good evening.